I love process fits. As much as I am bad at it, I love the rhythm. I love doing everything in order. And one thing that drives me nuts is when we have a commitment and we don't get a commitment video out. And when there's a commitment at 10 or 11 a.m. on a Saturday before a noon game, we don't get to that video. But there was a commitment this weekend. So let's talk about it now here on your recruiting update. Who is the latest Nittany Lion?
Gosh, it seems like so long ago, doesn't it? You text
So full of hope.
So it's behind the wall here. We were taking care of that story in one text, and T Frank hit up the other text and say, "Hey, someone just committed. What happened?" And the story was already up at that point. And it's very funny to see the separation of church and state here. But Matt Sieg committed before the game on Saturday, a 4-star industry safety from Western Pennsylvania, Fort Cherry. He doubles as a quarterback and a defensive back. He basically does everything. Fort Cherry, I believe single A. They went to the single A state title game last year. Very small school, but big time athlete. Like if you look at this kid, he's got size. He's he looks 12, yes, but he's
That's
got
a very
size.
old photo right there, just so everybody knows.
Yeah, and well, the new photos are not much. They don't age him all that much.
Oh, okay.
But it's okay because he's a really good athlete. He's a guy that's held a Penn State offer for over a year now. You don't offer too many kids in the Fort Cherry area. By the way, home of I believe. Oh my gosh, I just lost it. Marty Schottenheimer. Sorry, I wanted to call him Morningweg, but I knew that wasn't it. Marty Schottenheimer from Fort Cherry. As well, but Sieg is 6 foot and a half inch, is coming up on 6'1". He ran a 4.43 at camp the year before last, or excuse me, last year, I guess it was, and really put up some really good numbers, put up some really good film, and Penn State offered him fairly early in his sophomore year. Kind of one of those guys that you had as a Penn State lean from the jump. You just look at a lot of the logical data points, and it makes sense because small school kid from a pro Penn State area. Penn State's been very, very good in Western Pennsylvania. Pretty much have gotten who they wanted out of Western Pennsylvania in the last couple of years. This is a kid that they wanted. Nice little offer list. In addition to some of the regulars, you saw Wisconsin out there. Wisconsin was probably the other player in this. He was there for Penn State's win over Wisconsin, and then USC came along and offered him as well. So a lot to like about Matt Sieg. As just a really, really good football player who backs it up with the academic credentials that go there. So I think it's a good pickup for Penn State. I think they need a really good safety class in 2026, and they're in on some good ones early. And by in on, I mean like these are guys that I think they're advanced in the process a little bit further. And Sieg is one of those guys. So Penn State continues in the class of 2026 with a really good in-state pickup. I'm pulling up the Pennsylvania state rankings right now, but I believe he's number 5 in the On3 industry rankings in Pennsylvania. So there's a lot to like there with Matt Sieg. Really good weekend for Penn State on the whole, about 150-ish kids and more of a dense population of them being prospects. We talked all last week about this past weekend and this next weekend being very good for Penn State recruiting, or being very vital for Penn State recruiting. And despite the loss, I think it was a good showing. You look at the atmosphere, you look at the from start to finish, how things were going. That's what kids are going to remember. I mean, obviously the Penn State's reputation in big games, especially against Ohio State, is going to be what it is. But you think about the sticking points in this, and that's what people are going to remember. And I know a lot of people are down, rightfully so, after that game. But I think very positive event for Penn State.
Yeah, and that's always the disconnect that we talk about here is it can go really well from a recruiting perspective and you can still lose, and that it's about the individual player, right? And the individual player's experience outside of the feeling of the game's win and loss, because what people are more interested in themselves and what happens to them as opposed to generally what happens overall. New offer that went out this weekend. Can you tell us a little bit more about the latest offer here that you got?
I will also go back around to what you just said, in that sometimes we give a little too much credit and think these kids are looking at this the same way we do, or the same way the people in the chat do, and people listening, all that do, in terms of like the needling every single thing that happens. I'm not necessarily sure that's the case with 16, 17-year-olds. So we've seen that a bunch over the past few years. You get some good social media videos. You'll get some good guys on the field beforehand, sort of taking it all in. And some of these guys are going to some really great schools, but Penn State's atmosphere, stacks up with any of them, even though it was a noon kick and it should have been a night game. But anyway, New offer for Penn State in-state, Grayson McHugh from LaSalle. This is a very interesting one because he is huge. He was a tight end who camped as a tight end for Penn State again last year, and he continued to grow. And now all of a sudden he's an offensive tackle. He's 6'7", 245. He's got really good athletic measurables. And he's had a really good year for the top team in the state, who, by the way, LaSalle plays St. Joe's Prep this weekend. It's going to be a heck of a game. But that's one that I think the arrow is pointing up. We do not have him rated yet. I would not be surprised if this is a guy that probably starts around 90 as a 4-star kid in terms of the way that he moves, the way that he measures, and the way that his tape has looked so far this year. So really impressive for Grayson McHugh. And I think that Penn State is one of those that's in on him early, so we'll keep watching that one. But of course, nobody's here to talk about 2026. There's some 2025 that were on campus, potential flip targets. That's what everybody's going to look at. So 3 of them this week: Andrew Olish, the tight end from Lehigh Valley; Matt Zollers from Spring Ford; and Romero Eisen, the receiver from Baltimore. All priority targets for Penn State earlier in the cycle, all committed elsewhere. Olish, of course, to Michigan; Zollers to Missouri; and Eisen to USC. I believe Olish was the only one that actually got around to taking an official visit to Penn State. So Zollers and Eisen still have that available if they want it. We'll start with quarterback. You're still looking at one in the class of 2025. Beckham Kritza was up over the weekend, but Zollers came up. Not really hanging my hat on that one. I'm not feeling a ton of confidence. He's going back to Missouri this weekend. Says he's still locked in with Missouri. I know Penn State fans are going to say, well, he saw the Penn State offense and went running. Missouri's offense is worse than Penn State this year. So it's, pick your poison on that one, I guess, if that's the way you're going to look at it. But yeah, Penn State still wants them. I mean, there's still a handful of quarterbacks that they're going after in the class of 2025. Mixed bag in terms of interest level, mixed bag in terms of are they going to make it to campus for an official visit? Carter Smith, the recent Michigan decommit, is certainly one of those in the conversation as well. But yeah, I think they're still pushing hard to try and figure out their 2025 quarterback, even with Beckham Kritza still in the mix.
Yeah, it just started that sentence before I had fully formed. How many more spots do they have left? Like I'm curious that they've got a good number of players, and I know the numbers don't mean as much as they used to, but at a certain point you do have to start making some decisions. So you've got a long list of talent still out there, and there's a long list of players, and it feels like some names are still cropping up, like remember Eisen, which we'll get to here in a second, in part of a second conversation. But realistically, 3, 4, like what are you ballparking at least? What's the range in your mind?
I don't have a cap on it. Right now they got 25 guys in the class of 2025. If they could get to 30 with the guys that they're going after, that makes sense. I don't know that they're going to get there just because it is so tight, and you're talking flip targets, which is it's a whole different playground when you're talking about these guys. I mean, I mentioned Zollers and Eisen potentially taking official visits, and I'm not sure that it comes to that, but you've got a month until signing day as of yesterday. So like there's not much time for that to work. And then you've got to work on sort of prying them away from that commitment. And you're seeing it with Bradley Gompers right now in Duke, prying them away from that commitment and then getting them to flip. I mean, it's almost, I don't know, because, and I don't want to bring up the player because he's gotten in trouble and bad trouble since, but like talking about this flip last year in the class of 2023 is like the hardest thing is not like picking the new school. It's telling the other school that it's not going to happen. And that's something that, these kids, and I know that people have turned them into commodities by saying that they're getting paid. So they need to make their decision and all this kind of stuff. But like, they're still 16, 17-year-old kids, 18-year-old kids that are making these choices. So I think that's a hard aspect of it to look at. At some point,
it's also a personality thing too. I think like some people don't have a problem with that no matter the age. And then some people have a hard time with that no matter the age, where that's just I think a personality thing as much as it is an age thing. And there is a balance there of those two aspects for sure.
Yeah, and this is overgeneralizing, but in the Northeast, those kids it's harder for them to step back than like a kid from Florida. So like you're different sort of approaches on this one. We talk about Florida recruiting all the time. They'll drop you like nothing. It's not even think twice about it. But a lot of the kids from the Northeast, a little bit different. So that's kind of what you're looking at here. So again, Olish was on campus with his father, and I think that went well. I still continue to think Penn State's in a pretty good spot. I know he's committed to Michigan. I know he's going to Notre Dame this weekend, and that's a really, really interesting one, given Notre Dame's penchant for putting tight ends in the league and having the availability of playing time. And I will say this, I don't think he knows them as well, which might be an advantage for Notre Dame. Like you saw all this stuff during his recruitment about he knows a lot about Penn State and kind of knows the ins and outs of things, and not necessarily something that he that drew him to Penn State. Now
Right.
he's
He
come
didn't
back
jump on
around.
immediately knowing all that information.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's very interesting. It's just a case study in reading too much sometimes. So that's kind of what you got there. And then Eisen is interesting because we expected him to visit at the end of July, and he did not make that trip, but he eventually did make it back. Penn State's got to go to him and say, hey, we need some receivers that can make some plays. You're a receiver that can make some plays. He's a really good player, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Is he a 3-star by the industry? We have him as a 4-star 91. I like that ranking. He's a guy that runs really well. He's not like Lex Cyrus 10-4 or 10-5 or whatever Lex was, but 10-8-5, I think was his track 100 times. So, but he gets in and out breaks and catches the football.
Yep.
You saw that on Saturday. You need a guy like that. So Eisen's a guy that they're certainly still very high on. That net's still pretty wide, man. You look at the guys that are still out there, and
not
pretty
like
much every
USC's having a
position
great
they're
year
still offering.
either, right?
What's that?
It's not like USC's burning it down this year either.
Well, they are burning it down. They just replaced their quarterback today,
Right.
apparently. So it's been really interesting to follow that one. If you think he's the problem, I don't know. I haven't watched enough USC, but they certainly have not been hitting on all cylinders. Lost to Washington, who of course comes to Penn State this week. So that is certainly interesting. But yeah, I mean, that's a long way away from home. He's from Baltimore. USC's involved. I will say Georgia's involved, and if Georgia wants him, that's going to be tough to pass up. He's going to go down there for an official visit for the Tennessee game. So Romero Eisen committed to USC, but 3,000 miles away from home, 25 miles, 2,500, whatever the sign at the start of US 70 or Interstate 70 says down there in Baltimore. It's a long way away from home. So, and then we'll go to 2026 with a flip target. Peyton Falzone is a guy we mentioned on the show last week. He's a quarterback from Nazareth, Pennsylvania, committed to Brent Pry and Virginia Tech. I've said it before. I'm not sure that he's a quarterback at the next level. I think he's a tight end. I think he's a good high school quarterback, and I think he's got a strong arm. He's really athletic. I look at it and I see a guy that can be a Tyler Warren type guy, like be a 6'6" guy that can run really well, huge hands, got all these things working for him as a tight end prospect. But I still think he's thinking he's a quarterback. So that's going to depend on how that works. And, if you're Penn State, do you tell him he's a quarterback, bring him in as a 2-quarterback class with Troy Hune? I don't know. I mean, that makes not as much sense to the way that they've done things in the past, but at the same time, if you want him, you want him.